my good friend Lisa Kaplan sent me a poster by Jacob Metters, a Native American artist who has had 4 words arranged in this graphic from top to bottom: resist, protect, love, repeat. Resist, protect, love, repeat. Metters said he came up with this now famous graphic right after the 2016 election because he knew people were scared, not by feedback of a motorcycle.
The sun is right here.
They're scared of the election of Donald Trump, even more scary, and what it meant to our nation. He said in an interview published in Rotterdam, "I knew a lot of people were scared. I knew a lot of people were worried. I was sitting on the front porch drinking coffee. I was thinking about the past, thinking about the fact that as indigenous people, this is not anything new. That people like this have existed in our lives, and it's in colonial terms, and our people have had to fight these things before." That word, resist, is stuck in my head. And then I thought about how we've always had to protect each other and protect the things that are valuable to us. And then the love that's needed to continue that fight, to continue that, to do that every day, to wake up, to think about my ancestors, that continuation and the will to do that every day and pass that on to your next generation. That's, repeat. Now you have to repeat this daily. It becomes a daily, yearly, generational thing, like a muscle memory. Keep Metters' graphic in mind for me. I'll get back to that in a little bit. Jefferson Davis. How's that for a segue? Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederate States of the Confederate States during the American Civil War, described his enemy as those people. He used this phrase to refer to the Union Army and its supporters. Davis believed that the Union was an invading force that was trying to destroy the Confederate way of life. He also believed that the Union soldiers were fighting a cause that was morally wrong. As a result, he often referred to them as those people in a derogatory way. Davis's use of the phrase "those people" is a reminder of the deep divisions that existed in the United States during the Civil War. These divisions were not just about slavery, but also about the very nature of the American nation. The war was long and bloody, and it left a legacy of bitterness and resentment that continues to this day. Let me be absolutely clear. The primary cause of the American Civil War was the issue of slavery. And don't let anybody tell you it wasn't.
Right.
While there were other factors that contributed to tensions between northern and southern states, such as economic differences, states' rights, cultural divisions, slavery was the central issue that ultimately led to the outbreak of war. Indeed, slavery is just the result of the fact that our founding fathers, and let's not forget, they were all white men. They took for granted their profound racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, and homophobia as unassailable and self-evident. They believed the natural rights they espoused were only granted to them. If that was not so, they would not have made exclusions in the Constitution for black people to be counted as 3/5 of a person for representation and taxation purposes. It is essential to understand that the 3/5 compromise was not a statement about the intrinsic worth or humanity of enslaved individuals. It was a political compromise made to appease the interests of the southern states and to maintain unity among the states in the early years of our nation. It is a fact that the founding fathers relied on racist ideologies and beliefs they constructed to justify the enslavement of Africans. Pseudo-scientific theories emerged, such as the notion of white superiority and the dehumanization of Africans based on race. And oh, by the way, the concept of race is an artificial construct, and it has no scientific or genetic basis. These distorted beliefs were used to rationalize the brutal and exploitative treatment of the entire race of enslaved Africans and to perpetuate the institution of slavery. As David R. Rudier put it, the world got along without race for the overwhelming majority of its history. The U.S. has never been without it. It is worth noting that the Emancipation Proclamation issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1st, 1863, declared the freedom of enslaved individuals in Confederate-held territories. Slavery officially ended in the United States with the ratification of the 13th Amendment on December 6th, 1865, 2 years later. Thank you. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery and involuntary servitude throughout the entire country, making it unconstitutional to own slaves or hold individuals in bondage. Juneteenth is also known as Freedom Day or Emancipation Day because it was not until Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865, and read General Order Number 3, informing enslaved individuals of their freedom. This date, 6 months later, was seen as the celebration day of when slavery effectively ended in Texas. My friends, it was misinformation. And the fact that slaveholders in Texas actively worked to suppress news of emancipation and keep enslaved individuals uninformed about their freedom. They sought to maintain control over their enslaved labor force and prevent unrest or rebellion. This suppression of information delayed the dissemination of news about the Emancipation Proclamation. White supremacists used misinformation to keep black folks from knowing the truth about their lives. Does this sound familiar?
Yeah.
These days, there are people like their white supremacist ancestors who use misinformation, deceit, and propaganda to further their ends. They are attempting to rewrite history about how systemic racism, prejudice, and racial bias has had a pernicious stranglehold on the true potential of our nation. I will not mince words. It's because that group of people who I will now appropriate from Jefferson Davis to call those people find it inconvenient to admit that racism is embedded into the very core and fabric of our national character.
Right.
Like the Confederate racists before them, those people believe our nation is broken and must be remade in their image of white nationalism to be saved. Those people believe they act and speak for God through Christian nationalism. So the laws of pluralistic liberal society do not apply to them. They make their own rules, so they will use privilege and violence to achieve those ends. Those people, like the racist Confederates before them, have stormed our nation's capital and committed treason and insurrection.
Right.
Those people have called for the execution of former President Obama and others if Trump was indicted on charges in New York for falsifying business records. Just recently, with the indictment about classified documents, those people have demanded civil war and mass murder as retribution. I see Confederate flags here in Lake County. I don't know about you, but I hear gunshots echoing off the hills around our lovely lake.
That's right.
And some people are apparently practicing with their firearms. For what? I ask myself. My muse always answers ominously why they're preparing for war against us liberals. If you think I'm being paranoid, consider this from a Rolling Stone article that appeared on June 9th, this month, of people responding to Trump's classified documents indictment. A user named Bellic186 offered a deadly fix. The only way this country ever becomes anything like the Constitution says this country should be is if thousands of traitorous rats are publicly executed.
Say it again.
Commentator Doug Facekilla quickly chimed in to offer supplies. I got some rope somewhere in the garage.
Oh, shit.
The proposal for mass killing struck user Black-Pilled MAGA as going too far. Doesn't have to be thousands, just a few dozen would do. Shit would stop immediately. But user Nerdrum1 insisted taking out a few elites wouldn't make the difference, suggesting the number of dead requires a genocidal scale. Millions, he said. The real problem is the people that vote for them. As long as they exist, the problem can't be solved. A user named Heavy Metal Patriot concurred, correct. The notice that Bellic168 refers to how, quote, the Constitution says this country should be as if thousands of traitorous rats are publicly executed. How the Constitution should be is defined by those people through a strictly racist and religious lens. It does not occur to those people that the inalienable rights became defined through amendments to include all races, and that the Constitution has always held a strict separation between church and state that is maintained through the first clause in the Bill of Rights. No matter to those people, they're not dealing with fact or reason, just the raw emotions of victimization, grievance, and hatred of those who wish to take their ideal of a conservative utopia away from them. One of the primary tools of the oppression against we people of color throughout the history of our nation is that use of misinformation. Let's look briefly at how it's been operating. First of all, misinformation about emancipation. During and after the Civil War, there was misinformation disseminated by white supremacists, Southern sympathizers, and others seeking to downplay or distort the impact of emancipation. These included spreading narratives that enslaved individuals were content in their bondage, or that their conditions were not as oppressive as depicted. These false narratives were used to maintain white supremacy and justify the continued marginalization of African Americans. If you have any questions about that, go to YouTube and look up racist media of the past in the form of commercials, print, books, cartoons, and movies. Secondly, misinformation about modern racial issues. In the modern era, misinformation continues to circulate around racial issues. For example, false narratives are propagated about police violence against Black Americans, suggesting that victims were at fault or that the issue is exaggerated. Stereotypes and misinformation about the intelligence, behavior, or cultural practices of different racial and ethnic groups are also perpetuated, contributing to systemic bias and discrimination. If you don't believe me about that, you don't have to dig deep to find vehement denials of systemic racism and insistent on American exceptionalism, and the false narrative that we live in a colorblind society. Third, the role of social media. Social media platforms have amplified the spread of misinformation in both historical and modern contexts. In the past, newspapers and pamphlets were used to disseminate false narratives about emancipation. But today, misinformation can be rapidly spread, leading to the viral spread of false or distorted information that can shape public opinion and perpetuate racial biases at the speed of electrons. If you don't believe me, research the role of misinformation during elections, how public opinion is manipulated, about viral hoaxes, about health misinformation, and about deep fakes, the undermining the authenticity of information that's shared online. Another tool of oppression is the reliance on complacency. By that, I mean the impulse for self-congratulations that allows us to just let things stay as they are, to not rock the boat, to let a comfortable status quo settle in when you're far short of the mark. You know, I personally have been very forceful in the last few years about criticizing the renewed racism, prejudice, and violence that the right has sought to normalize.
Yes, thank you.
On social media platforms, in other media, in speeches like this one, in sermons, in business, and just about any place I am in public, I have talked about how systemic racism has personally affected me. I've pointed out what I call racial calculus. I've composed music. I have devoted much of my art to elevating the voices and experiences of Black people. And what I have said makes some people uncomfortable. They've come to me and said, Clovice, I didn't know you were such a militant. Now, my response to this, in as loving a way as I can, is I say, that means you don't know me very well. And then I explain that all Black people are militants because we live in a world of constant microaggressions, and that from the time we can walk, we realize we must overperform to be afforded opportunities on par with our white peers. I explained that white privilege, something that my many friends and family do not recognize, is as pervasive as the law of gravity, and that it affects all social interactions to some degree. I wrote a sermon called The Arc of Justice Up Close and Personal in June of 2020 in response to the murder of George Floyd. I candidly talked about what it's like to be a Black man in this society by peeling away the curtain of my own challenges and the pain that I have experienced. The sermon was so impactful that it caused people to say, I can't believe this has happened to our Clovice. What can we do in our community to make it a more welcoming place? I'm proud to say that a group of beautiful people, the people that Joanne Sakata just talked about, this beautiful group of people then used that sermon as the genesis for the community visioning group forum that's sponsored by the Board of Supervisors in this county, and that is a very cool thing. But there is so much more to do. These days, I need to explain what it's like to be Black in our country so much that I get tired of the effort. We Black people need you white people to talk to each other about the issue of race. We need you to recognize your fragility around such discussions and become comfortable with being uncomfortable. After 2 generations since what we now call the Great Civil Rights Era, we are in a precarious place because of complicity and because of complacency. Because of complacency, I, like so many others, began to believe that our society was moving forward so I could put my claws away. Progressive policies, even though they appeared in fits and starts, came to be codified into law. Corporations began to respond to the changing demographics of our country. People of color became commanders of starships and far-flung space stations. Who would have dreamed that women would lose the right to control over their bodies? That Roe versus Wade would be overturned? Who could have imagined the Voting Rights Act would be gutted? That the rights of our trans brothers and sisters would be so severely curtailed? That libraries would ban books about sexuality, gender, and race? You see, many of us still have the words of Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech at the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool reverberating in our minds. We have been kumbayaing each other for so long that we did not recognize the seething cauldron of hatred and grievance that is brewing beneath us. Those people I'm talking about, they don't want to negotiate. They don't want to legislate. They don't want to govern. They want to blow up our government because it does not conform to their ideals and values. It is manifestly true that the ideals most of us have about the role of our government to maintain a liberal, pluralistic, equitable, diverse society is anathema to them. They feel justified in doing anything and everything to destroy what has been built because they believe they work to the higher purpose of their God, to the natural dictates of white supremacy and Christian nationalism. We have been marching towards King's End Zone and dreaming of a better world and kumbaya. And those people have been busy ripping up the goalposts, and they intend to meet us armed to the teeth. In February of 2022, a Republican Party member, Mike Dittmer, a then candidate for the Michigan State Senate, told prospective constituents they should show up armed to voting booths. He told them that if they suspected voting irregularities or fraud, they should unplug the voting machines. He said, the ideal thing to do is this peacefully. That's ideal. But the American people, at some point in time, if we can't change the tide, which I believe we can, we need to be prepared to lock and load. Not only are there such threats to polling places, election officials and workers at polling places are being intimidated and are being abused in many places in our nation. Following a failed re-election of the former Republican president, the Republican Party spent much of the past few years undermining the authority of state and local election officials in the democracy that we enjoy here in the United States. They continue to this day to lie about the 2020 presidential election and are angry at election officials who refuse to go along with attempts to overthrow the results. And those officials have been subjected to a constant stream of abuse and threats ever since then. A report by Reuters contains more than 850 threatening messages, over 30 jurisdictions and 16 states. Ominously, about 110 of them appear to warrant federal prosecution. How did we go from disagreeing with each other to shooting people? Sadly, there are more and more people who feel justified in doing violence against other citizens and against our own government if they don't like what is said or done. For those people, the ballot box is not a tool for democracy. It is the symbol of an institution and a constitution under attack by people who wish to destroy their power, their influence, and their privilege. On January 1st, 2022, the Washington Post reported that 1 in 3 say violence against government can be justified, citing fears of political schism and pandemic. Let's stop and think about that for a moment. Let me repeat this. Just 5 days before we all witnessed the attack on our nation's capital, 1 in 3 people said violence against the government can be justified. Nikki Lake, on June 11th, this year, just a few days ago, speaking to a group of MAGA enthusiasts after former President Trump was indicted again for putting our national secrets at jeopardy, she said, "I have a message tonight for Merrick Garland and Jack Smith and Joe Biden. And the guys back there in the fake news media, you should listen up as well. This one's for you. If you want to get to President Trump, you're going to have to go through me. And you're going to have to go through 75 million Americans just like me. And I'm going to tell you, most of us are card-carrying members of the NRA. That's not a threat. That's a public service announcement." All this illustrates another tool of oppression, that of violence, and the threat of violence. Another form of oppression is its kissing cousin. That's the codification of discriminatory laws that place one group, racial or otherwise, under the direct control of another group. Black people are aware. We've been woke to the fact that in the aftermath of the American Civil War and during Reconstruction era, there were efforts by some white supremacist groups and state governments to disarm newly freed black people, particularly in the southern states. These measures aim to maintain white dominance and prevent black individuals from exercising their rights and defending themselves. For example, the black codes enacted in the South restricted the gun rights of African Americans. But it was not just in the southern states that prohibited ownership of guns by black people. The Sullivan Law, enacted in 1911 in the state of New York, was primarily a gun control measure that aimed to regulate the possession and carrying of firearms in the state, particularly handguns. That law, along with other gun control measures during that era, disproportionately affected black people. They face so many challenges in obtaining permits and complying with the laws as to be a virtual ban on black gun ownership. And do you remember a few years ago, there was a big protest in, I think it was Fort Worth or Dallas, and they had these black men walking around with AR-15s. I told my wife, what kind of fools are they? Because we're not supposed to have firearms. It doesn't look right. And that's because historically, we weren't supposed to. But let me tell you some other modern examples of this law-enabled group control over others that indicate the rising popularity. What am I talking about? What about Texas bounty laws enacted to discourage people from helping women seeking abortions through the threat of lawsuits against them? What about the anti-woke laws attempting to be passed in several states? What such laws use the power of the state to suppress important conversations about systemic issues and hinder progress towards greater equality and inclusivity. These laws are designed by conservatives to counter what they see as ideological or political bias, to stifle academic freedom, limit educational curriculum development, and undermine efforts to address historical injustices and promote social change. In other words, after losing the intellectual ground to fact-based reasoning, the far right intends to solidify their oppression against groups that have been historically hindered in progress towards greater equality and inclusivity. Coretta Scott King said, "Struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and you win it in every generation." My friends, because of deceit, violence and the threat of violence, complacency, and the erosion of laws that ensure equity, inclusion, and diversity we're in trouble. We stop struggling for freedom in every generation. On this Juneteenth, I am here to tell you that few are more aware of this failure than we militant Black folk, or Native Americans, or gay and queer people, trans people, and other marginalized people. Do you not see how celebrating Juneteenth has become an act of militancy? Did you know, had it registered to you until I told you, that there have been so many Juneteenth celebrations marred by violence in the past few years? Have you been aware that multiple perpetrators of the violence in the majority of these attacks have not been apprehended, and that officially no motive has been determined for these actions? It is far beyond the leaps of human imagination, isn't it? To define and figure out what that motive is. How many other national holidays have been so brutally disrupted, and by whom? Let's go back to Medder's 4 words again. I want to use them to provide a clear contrast between democratic principles based on the inclusiveness most of us aspire to, and the totalitarian regime based on exclusivity those people believe in. Remember Medder's 4 words. Resist, protect, love, repeat. Please repeat after me. Resist, protect, love, repeat. Resist, protect, love, repeat. Resist, protect, love, repeat. Keep on.
Resist, protect,
Restrictions
love,
and intolerance
repeat.
imposed by those people. Resist
protect,
the call for white
love,
supremacy and Christian
repeat.
nationalism.
Resist, protect,
against their
love,
police state,
repeat.
systemic racism,
Resist,
hatred of women, fear of
protect,
queer people, and
love,
deceit.
repeat.
Protect against
Resist,
those who would kill
protect,
when they can't win
love,
an argument.
Repeat.
Love
Resist, protect,
instead of hate.
love, repeat.
Even the people who hate us
Resist,
never
protect,
give up trying to change
love,
their direction
repeat.
from exclusion
Resist,
to inclusion.
protect, love, repeat.
Repeat the cycle of cultural renewal based on justice.
Amen.
Thank you, my brothers and sisters.
Woo! Amen.
Democracy not only works, it works. It's not only on inclusion, but what underlies democracy is a belief that all human beings are inextricably connected to each other. We sincerely believe in A. Philip Randolph's admonition that an injustice to one is an injustice to all. The concept of justice stretches to and through humanity, and it extends to our Mother Earth. The white supremacist Christian utopia envisioned by those people is based on hatred. It does not rely on healthy new ideas to replenish society with the vibrancy of contributions by other ethnicities and cultures. Like a cancer, it propagates feeding on the body of civilization, seeking to transform it into itself. To those people, human beings are not connected to each other, and they are certainly not connected to other cultures, and most certainly not connected to our mother planet. Those people I'm talking about, they are our brothers and sisters and parents and nephews and nieces, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and our children. They are our co-workers. They're members of our families. They are neighbors. They're representatives in government, our policy leaders, and in one case, they were our president. We need to have some serious conversations with them right now. But those people are also us when we don't challenge them whenever and wherever they speak words provoked by hatred and deceit. We are them when we don't stand against laws designed to disenfranchise, to redline, to gerrymander, to dehumanize our trans brothers and sisters, to yank away rights from gay and queer people, and to restrict the rights of people to women to have control over their bodies. They are us when we don't scream about the immoral and anti-Christian agenda of the anti-woke racists who have cynically appropriated and perverted Black people's term that we have used for decades to describe how we are woke to injustice, systemic racism, and police brutality. I believe Juneteenth is a day that must be shared by all Americans as a celebration of the resilience of our nation, which sputters onwards toward a vision of pluralism, liberalism, equity, and inclusivity. Look at the violent lengths some people have used to intimidate us into not celebrating this day. On this day, all Americans can claim that though we fail to grasp hold of the better angels of our nature, that we must at least try to do so. I look forward to a day in the future when we can truly say of those people that they are an early and now extinct form of Americanism.
Yeah.
I look forward to the day when our progeny look like mocha-colored coffee. I look forward to the day when all the people of our great nation can proclaim on Juneteenth, all human beings are born equal. We believe that as such, they are endowed with inalienable rights. Americans are not exceptional. We are not immune to the failures of history, but we always strive to understand those failures and create a more perfect union.
Yes.
We acknowledge that we are inextricably connected to all human beings and to our Mother Earth, and that we must do everything possible to ensure that the rights of humanity, the Earth, and all species that live on it are respected.
Yeah.
We believe in justice that flows from the beauty of humanity in the service of love. On Juneteenth, we transform hatred into love. On Juneteenth, we celebrate our freedom from fear. We resist, we protect, we love, and we repeat. And then we party. And then we party.
Yes.
And now we freaking party.